Welcome to the Joy of Cruising podcast with your host, award-winning author Paul C. Thornton, a weekly conversation with the amazing cruisers featured in the Joy of Cruising trilogy, comprised of The Joy of Cruising, Cruising Interrupted, and new release, The Joy of Cruising Again. Each book is a compilation of features about cruisers and cruise and travel personalities from around the world. It's the next best thing to cruising, hearing about cruising from the unique and diverse perspectives of Paul's amazing guests.
Hello, passionate cruisers. This is Paul, and this week on the Joy of Cruising podcast, we have a special guest. I am delighted to welcome Joe Church, a truly amazing story and reader favorite. In the Joy of Cruising, I dubbed Joe the Marathoner of the Seas, and told his unique story of how 70-something Joe runs a marathon distance, 26.2 miles, on every Royal Caribbean ship, beginning with Liberty of the Seas in 2008. Not only his first marathon distance on a ship, but his first cruise altogether, through to Royal's newest, the largest ship in the world, Wonder of the Seas, just a few weeks ago. Joe was also featured in the second book, Cruising Interrupted. His story is evergreen. As long as Royal builds new ships, Joe says he's going to do a marathon distance on them. As fascinating as that is, there's a lot more to Joe than running on ships. He ran in the New York City Marathon a couple of years ago. He has run marathons on every continent, 63 countries, and in every state in the United States. Well over 25,000 miles since running his first marathon in only 2005. Joe is a man of three passions: cruising, running, and he is an ardent birdwatcher who traveled the world birdwatching long before his first cruise. Welcome, Joe, to the Joy of Cruising podcast.
Thank you.
So how you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. How about yourself?
I am hanging in there, trying to get the hang of podcasting and waiting for my latest book, The Joy of Cruising Again, to go through the production process. So that'll be out in a couple of months. So I told the listeners a little bit about your amazing background. Before we delve into your background further, tell us about your cruise on Wonder of the Seas.
Well, we just got off Wonder of the Seas about last week, and it was a good trip. I was able to get my 26.2 mile run in on the first night, so I was happy about that. Unfortunately, from the weather standpoint, we weren't able to go to the perfect day at Coco Cay. We ended up having to pass that up, but we got into St. Thomas early. Had a chance to do some snorkeling, had a chance to do some of the fun things on the ship. We did the Abyss and really enjoyed the new show there, the water show there, Intense. That was fantastic to watch.
Now, I'm sure in all of your cruises on Royal Caribbean, you've been to Perfect Day before, right?
No, I have not.
Really?
Actually, correct.
Oh, okay.
I've been to Liberty but not to Coco Cay.
Well, I guess you'll have to do that one on Icon.
Yep.
So talk about how your birdwatching trek in Ecuador ultimately led you to running.
Okay. Back about 2000, I had been working for many years without getting much exercise, doing anything physical, and I had put on a fair bit of weight, and I had not even realized it. But I decided to go on a birdwatching trip to Ecuador, and when I got down there, one of the stops that we made to look for some hummingbirds was at a place, Cotopaxi Volcano, and we had driven up to about 14,000 feet in elevation and pulled into a parking lot, and everybody jumped out of the vehicle to go look for a couple hummingbirds that live up at that elevation. And when I got out of the vehicle, I could barely move. I was so out of shape that just that change in elevation was enough that I sat there, I leaned against the vehicle for quite a while, walked around just a little bit while everybody else hiked around. I did get to see the birds, so I was happy about that. But then we ended up leaving, and when I got home, I said to my late wife, I said, Eileen, I've wanted to go bird watching all over the world, and here I am finding out that I'm not physically capable of doing it because I haven't paid attention to keeping myself in shape, and I think we need to change things. And at that point, we both changed our diet significantly. I dropped about 50 pounds over the course of about 3 years.
Wow.
And in the process, I actually started off just doing exercises other than running, but got bored with them and tried running and found that I really liked it and started doing more and more of it, and got myself in pretty good shape to the point where I could run marathons.
So if I could ask, Joe, how old were you when you started to run marathons?
Well, my first marathon, I was 53 years old, I think. Let me think. 2000. Yeah, I was 53 years old when I ran my first marathon. I was about 52 when I started running.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So talk about how that transition into you becoming the marathoner of the seas. In other words, what led to running on RCL ships?
Okay. Well, I had been doing the marathons at that point for a few years. This was 2008 that my late wife, Eileen, said to me that she wanted me to go on a cruise. She had cruised a few other times with her sisters and family members. And I had always said, well, no, I don't want to because I don't want to get out of training. I don't want to put on weight on a cruise and that sort of thing. And she pushed me again. And finally I said, okay, the deal is I'll get on a cruise ship. I'll run the first night. I'll run a marathon distance on the ship. And then I can eat whatever I want the rest of the week. I won't worry about it. So I actually did that in 2008 on the Liberty of the Seas. And that was the first time. And afterwards, she asked me if I wanted to do it, go on another cruise. And I said, okay, but the same deal holds. So we did a few more cruises. And I think by the time she passed away in 2013, she and I had done, I think, 7 different cruises on Royal Caribbean at that point. And in each case, I had run a marathon distance on each one.
So tell us a little bit about that first marathon on the ship.
Okay, well, the first marathon on the ship on the Liberty, that one went really well, which if I had known how tough some of the other ones were, I don't know that I would have done. But the first one, we had a following wind, which means, when you're traveling like that, it feels like there's no wind at all because the ship and the winds were both moving at around 20 knots. So, and it was coming from behind. So there was no, every time I turned a corner, I didn't feel wind. So it made for an easy run. And I did the first one in a little over 4 hours. I think it was like 4 hours and 15 minutes. And the track on that one was a rather nice track. And after having done that, I thought, yeah, that was a successful event. And I wouldn't mind doing it again.
Now, you alluded to some of the subsequent runs were a bit tough. Talk about your most challenging run on a ship.
Well, my most challenging run on the ship was on the Radiance, and it was it was a trip to Alaska, or from Alaska, and we got on board in Seward and worked our way down to Vancouver. And it was the night that I went out, it was rain. It started to rain once I was out. It started to rain, and the temperatures were in the high 30s, and the temperatures began to drop, and the winds began to pick up, and the rain turned to sleet. and the sleet lasted for about a half an hour or so, and the winds got worse. And so I'd run into the wind, and I struggled. I really almost had to walk and crawl to get forward to the bow of the ship. And then as soon as I turned around, the wind would whip me back to the stern. And I kept on struggling through that, and the sleet finally actually turned to snow. And by the time I finished, there was about an inch to 1.5 inches of snow on the deck.
Wow.
And the combined speed of the ship and the winds, I was running into a 45 to 50 mile an hour wind.
Wow.
Running into the wind. When it was behind me, of course, it was just blowing me down the end of the ship very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I got back to my room when I was done, and that one took me almost 5 hours. And when I got back to the room and took my shirt off, my whole chest looked like a piece of raw meat.
Wow.
And I had welts, and it was pretty brutal.
Now, knowing what I know about you, I doubt it, but did you ever consider not completing the run?
No, I never considered that. I'm a pretty determined guy. Once I decide I'm going to do something, I can push through pretty hard. I've run 100-mile races, and that you have to mentally be able to push through a lot of times when you're just not feeling like you want to be doing what you're doing. So,
Mm-hmm. Now, do you have a favorite run on a ship, or what was your most fulfilling run on a ship?
Good question. I would probably say the Jewel. I ran on the Jewel in May of 2013, and that was 3 months after my wife passed away. And what I did, I had made the decision that I was going to try to run a 100-mile race to raise funds for the American Cancer Society, since my wife had passed away from lung cancer.
Uh-huh.
So I needed to start training, and she had passed away in early February. So it was in early May. I boarded the Jewel, and I went out, and I decided I was going to run as long as I could, at least 8 hours, for 8 hours, and hoping to get in 40 miles. And I did. That's the longest I've run on any of the Royal Caribbean ships. I ran 40 miles on that one. And then about a month later, I went out and actually on a track ran 100 miles at a thing called the American Cancer Society's Relay for Life.
Mm-hmm. I know that a lot of folks would be inclined to take 31 ships, which is how many Royal Caribbean ships you've run on, and multiply that by 26.2 miles, and say, that's your total that you ran on ships. But you just explained, you ran 40 miles on one ship to prepare for the 100-mile race. So how many miles in total do you think you've run on ships?
Oh, good question. I've never counted it up, but it's probably well over 1,500, because, well, for example, on this past trip on the Wonder, I did the 26.2, but then I also ran 4 other mornings. So my total count for the run for that cruise was 45.5 miles on the Wonder. Mm-hmm. So probably is somewhere around 1,500 miles or so on board ships.
Wow. Do you have any major marathons coming up on land?
Well, I don't have any major ones coming up, but I do have three smaller ones coming up. Since I've been working on running in different countries, some of them are small marathons put together by a bunch of people who are also trying to run marathons in different countries. So we got one coming up in Montserrat in May, and then we have one in American Samoa and one in Samoa coming up in July. Those are the only three that I actually have on the books right now. That doesn't mean I won't find more later in the year, but that's the only three that I'm actually looking at the moment.
Now you've run on every continent, right? Or am I correct on that? Yep.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And
Yeah, I've run.
I think I said in
Yep.
the intro, was it 63 countries?
Correct.
Mhm.
Yep. 63.
So I'm sure we have some ardent runners listening, or people fascinated by your ongoing Royal Caribbean feat. How do we follow you on social media?
Well, the only form of social media that I use is
Hmm.
Facebook. Uh, I never got into all the other ones, but I use Facebook
Hmm.
regularly. I'll post after my runs and some of my other trips and so forth
Hmm.
there.
Hmm. What do you have booked? Cruises or land travel?
Well, I have a lot of stuff booked. I'm going to the Philippines here in about 3 weeks. That's a bird watching trip, and that'll be about a month. And then I come back from that, and I have the marathon in Montserrat. And then in June and July, I have a trip that is sort of a combination trip. I start off in Tahiti, I go to Papua New Guinea, I go from there to Vanuatu, from there to Fiji. From Fiji, then I go to do the marathons in Samoa and American Samoa. So, yeah, but the other parts of it are basically bird watching. However, I will have to do some running to keep myself in shape for the marathons in
Hmm.
Samoa.
Wow, what a world traveler. Now, Icon, do you have an estimated time for that run?
You mean as a date?
Yeah, let me interrupt just for the audience who might not be aware. You correct me if I'm wrong, Joe. Icon of the Seas is Royal's next ship, correct?
Correct. And while I was on the Wonder, we scheduled to a date or a week to run to do the Icon. So I am planning on running it, but that isn't until November of 2024. So that's a ways off yet.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. All right, before we let you go, I'm going to shift gears. A couple of, what I call fun cruise questions, and then perhaps an oddball question. So, what's your favorite cruise drink or dish, or both?
uh, well, that's a good question. When it comes to drink, I'm not much of a drinker, so coffee is normally my normal drink of the
Mm-hmm.
day. Uh, I do drink a fair bit of coffee, and occasionally I'll have a beer in the
Mm-hmm.
evening, but that's about it from the drinking standpoint. From a dish, I lean toward eating lasagna. So whenever they have a lasagna, that's normally what I go for.
Do you do the specialty restaurants or just the main dining room?
Uh, we do mostly the main dining room. However, we have done a few of the uh, specialty restaurants. In fact, this trip we did we did Giovanni's one
Mm-hmm.
night.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Next question. What's your most memorable or most outlandish or even most embarrassing cruise experience?
that's it would have to be a trip on the Enchantment of the Seas. Uh, this was when my wife was still alive, my late wife was still alive, um, and it was they had a thing called Mr. Enchantment of the Seas contest, and they you had to apparently people put you know signed up for it. My wife decided to sign me up for it, and course, this was mostly guys. It was during spring break, and there were all these college guys and so forth. And so there were 8 people who signed up for it, 7 guys who were probably in their 20s, and me. I was 58 at the time. And they had all these different events that you had to do. And the first one was like you had to sit down on a balloon and try to pop the balloon by sitting on it. And I was last of that. And then you had to run around the pool, and you had to kiss as many of the women that were standing around the pool as you possibly could within 1 minute. I was last at that. And I actually slipped and fell into the pool. I got out of the pool, and at this point, the guy who was the cruise director who was doing the announcing of this was calling me Mr. Joe. And he's okay, now Mr. Joe, it's time to I was supposed to do jumping rope in a shallow pool. There was about 6 inches of water in this pool and I did about 3 jumps, and man, I landed flat on my back. And I got up, and the next event, and I, of course, was last at that. These other guys did, like 30 or 40 in a minute. And here I did 3. Then the next event was to do push-ups with your girlfriend or your wife on your back. Well, I got these brawny guys, then they're all doing push-ups with this one guy. The guy that won was probably about 220 pounds of all muscle, and he had a girlfriend who was probably about 95 pounds, and she's on his back, and of course he's just batting these push-ups out. And here I am. My wife was probably about 130 pounds at the time, and I was about 150, and like I was struggling and struggling. So the cruise director walks over, grabs her by the back of the shirt and grabs me by the back of the shirt and helps me do a push-up. Well, of course, at this point, people the audience was cheering for me because I was definitely the underdog about everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so when in the end, of course, I was last. And so they announced that I was the 7th runner-up. Mr. and so, I got a kick out of it. I enjoyed that. But what really topped it off was we disembarked in Limon, Costa Rica, I believe. No, it was in Panama. It was in Colon, Panama, that we disembarked. We get and Eileen and I get in a transportation over to Panama City, and we go into a restaurant in Panama City, and we're sitting there. And oh yeah, I forgot to mention, during the rest of the week, every time I walked by anybody who had seen that, they'd say, "Hey, Mr. Joe, hey, Mr. Joe, hey, Mr. Joe." All the time I was getting that the rest of the cruise. I get to Panama City, I walk into a restaurant, and this guy jumps up and goes, "Hey, Mr. Joe."
Well, what you should have done, Joe, is challenge those young boys to a 5K.
I know it.
You wouldn't have been 7th runner-up then.
No, I don't think so. I probably would have done pretty well against them at that point because I was still pretty fast at that point.
The kind of oddball question. So you have a fervent following. I featured you in a couple of books, which I promote all the time. And so whenever I promote you, I tag you and it goes to your Facebook group and your fans love it. So welcome to the many Joe Church fans listening. Share one thing that my listeners and your fans don't know about you.
Well, that's a pretty tough question. One thing that with my bird watching, I have seen more species of hummingbirds in the world than anybody but maybe 20 other people. So, which is pretty unusual. There are about 366 species of hummingbirds in the world, and I've seen about 320 of them.
Wow.
Yeah, there are only maybe a dozen people that have seen more species of them than I have, and these are these guys that have seen 10,000 or 9,000 of the different species of birds in the world.
You know what I thought you might say, so I'm gonna see if I can get it out of you. When you're talking about one thing that folks don't know about you. So when you were training for, I believe it was to run on the Symphony of the Seas, I know you were training for the what was it, the Tokyo Marathon, I believe at the time.
Oh, okay.
Something happened, but that didn't stop you from running in the Tokyo Marathon. So say a little bit about that and talk about why somewhere in the joy of cruising I call you the luckiest man in the world.
Okay. I had run this was in the fall of 2017. I had been running 100-mile races. I had run two of them, one in September and one in October. And I had scheduled myself to run another one in January of 2018. So I was still training a fair bit. And so it was December 20th, I had gone out, or December 19th, actually, I had gone out and run a 30-mile training run. And I came back. The next day was a rest day. And I went to the grocery store, and I passed out behind the wheel of my car. And I ended up calling Marie and asking her to pick me up. And she picked me up from the grocery store and brought me home. And whenever I got home, she told me to call my doctor. Called my doctor. They put me on hold, and I passed out again. And she realized I had stopped breathing and that my eyes had rolled back in my head and I had gone stiff. And she was getting ready to perform CPR on me, but she called 911. And while she was getting ready to try to do CPR, I came to for the second time. And the medical people showed up and they checked me out and they said, "We're not seeing anything wrong with you. Do you really want to go to the hospital?" And I said, "Yeah, I don't pass out. This is unusual. So yes, I need to go to the hospital." So they took me to the hospital, and they were checking me out in the hospital, and they said, "Your blood pressure's fine. Your heart rate's fine. Everything looks good. Can't see anything wrong with you." And he said, "But, do you feel anything strange?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "The side of my neck feels a little odd." And they said, "Well, let's do a CAT scan on your head. Maybe you have a carotid artery issue or something like that." I said, "Fine." So they put me in the CAT scan, and I came out of the CAT scan, and they said, "We're seeing absolutely nothing wrong with you." And as I sat up, I passed out a third time, but this time they had me wired. So the electrocardiogram, they immediately saw that I went into ventricular fibrillation. Basically, my heart stopped beating. And they had to shock me with the paddles and bring me around. And they did. And then that night, they moved me to another hospital because I needed to have bypass surgery. And that night, while I was at the new hospital, I was asleep and I woke up and there were all these people looking at me. And I was like, "What's wrong?" And they said, "Your blood pressure dropped to zero, your heart stopped, and we slapped you with the paddles again. And so we've decided to move you up from afternoon surgery to the first thing this morning, and the surgeon's on his way in now." So they did triple bypass surgery on me, and I came out of the surgery, and one of the guys on the cardiac team, was a marathoner. And I said to them, "I have the Tokyo Marathon coming up in 66 days. It will be February 25th. It's my 66th birthday. Will I be able to run it?" And they said, "Well, let's talk about that later. Maybe you will, but we'll talk about that at your 6-week checkup."
Mm-hmm.
I said, "Okay." So I waited, or I did, they gave me exercises and they told me not to run. But they did want me to walk, and they wanted me to walk a little more each day, and a little more and a little more, and to do the exercises to keep my self in shape, or as best shape I could get in, without lifting more than 5 pounds, because I was limited because of the open heart surgery to no more than 5 pounds. So I did what they told me. I made sure I maximized what they told me. If they told me to do 3 to 5 repetitions, I did 5 repetitions. But anyhow, I went in for my 6-week checkup, and they said to me, okay, the person there said, okay, how far did you walk? I said, 135 miles, based on what my Garmin said. And he looked at me and he said, you really want to do this marathon, don't you? And I said, I really want to do this marathon. And he said, well, as far as the surgical team is concerned, you've healed well enough based on the x-ray we took. You've healed well enough. Things look good. We will say it's okay with us, but you need to have the cardiologist also say it's okay with him. So I had a cardiologist appointment 2 days later, walked in to see the cardiologist, and I said, is it okay to run a marathon in Tokyo in a couple of weeks? And he said, well, according to the report from the surgeon, it's okay with them. He said, according to after he did the EKG and all that stuff and looked at it, he said, as far as I'm concerned, go for it. He said, but start out slowly. And he said, and there's only one requirement for me, and that is that if you feel, while you're doing it, if you feel any pain whatsoever in your chest, you stop immediately. Don't take another step. Seek medical help. So I agreed to that. And 66 days after having open heart surgery, I was in Tokyo and running a marathon. And that was not one of my faster marathons. But
Joe, that's just one aspect of just an amazing, amazing story. You know, I could write about you in each one of the Joy of Cruising books if I were going to continue writing the books, because your story is truly evergreen. As long as Royal Caribbean introduces new ships, and you're up to it, you're going to be on there. So, unfortunately, or not unfortunately, but I'm not going to write another cruise book, but I have the podcast, so I know that you'll be back on. As a matter of fact, you can go ahead and pencil in for 1.5 years from now, because we're going to want you back after you do your run on Icon of the Seas.
okay, well, sounds good.
Finally, Joe, we're going to put you to work. Please tell the listeners who is the winner this week of a copy of either The Joy of Cruising or Cruising Interrupted.
The winner this week is Deborah Norwalk Schneider.
Thank you. Deb is a member of the Joy of Cruising podcast group on Facebook, so I will follow up with her shortly after this airs. Joe, thank you for coming on the Joy of Cruising podcast. As I've already said, we'd love to have you back. We're going to have you back after your marathon distance run on Icon of the Seas. I will see you on the ocean. Happy cruising, Joe.
Thank you, and same to you.
All right, take care.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Joy of Cruising and Cruising Interrupted can be ordered at the link on the joyofcruisingpodcast.com, each for $16.99 plus shipping. Order the soon-to-be-released The Joy of Cruising Again, also at thejoyofcruisingpodcast.com for $18.99. For each of the 3 books, use the discount code Joy of Cruising Podcast and get $4 off. Again, the discount code Joy of Cruising Podcast. Enter to win a copy of The Joy of Cruising or Cruising Interrupted while supplies last at thejoyofcruisingpodcast.com. by joining the Joy of Cruising Podcast Facebook group, or both, to increase your chance to win. A winner will be announced on each show. Please leave us a review and tell a friend about us. Thank you. We hope you enjoyed the brief escape to the ocean. See you next week.